Welcome, everyone, to today's program, sponsored by the Plant Initiative. It's titled Rewilding and the Art of Plant Whispering, a conversation with Rachel Corby, with moderator Paul Moss. I'm Walter Furness. I'm a board member of the Plant Initiative, and I'm very excited to introduce Rachel and Paul to start off our 1 hour program. So Rachel Corby is an author, a personal rewilding coach, plant whisperer, and sacred plant medicine mentor based in the west of England. She is the author of 4 books, including Rewild Yourself, Becoming Nature, and most recently, Rewilding and the Art of Plant Whispering. Rachel first began to hear the whispers of plants in a remote Scottish valley during the early 1990s while completing research for her geography degree. Her work is entirely experiential, constantly guided and nudged by direct communication with Gaia and her plant and fungal allies. And Paul Moss is the Plant Initiative's co-founder and volunteer executive director. He has degrees in biology, agronomy, and marketing. He is currently a PhD candidate in the University of Minnesota's Department of Geography and Environment, where he is studying issues related to plant ethics. So this program will start with a half-hour conversation between Rachel and Paul. For the remainder of the program, Rachel will be responding to questions posed by you, the attendees, that will be presented by Paul as selected from questions posted in the Zoom chat. So we encourage you to suggest a question for Rachel to discuss by posting it in the chat, which you can see at the bottom of your screen. This program will be recorded and posted online on the Plant Initiative's YouTube channel, and a link to the recording will be sent to everyone who registered. So with that, I am turning over the program to Paul.
Great. Thanks so much, everyone. Really appreciate your all being here today, and really happy to be in conversation with Rachel. So for right now, let's get started. Rachel, could you tell me a little bit about your journey in life that has led you to your current path with plants?
Yeah, hi Paul. Um, I do get asked this question a lot, and I always find it really difficult to answer because the longer I've been answering it, the more I've realized it's a bit like someone asking you about breathing, about when you first noticed that you were breathing, and because I feel like the path with plants has been through my whole life since first day, but I first became consciously aware of what was going on around me, um, as mentioned by Walter in when I was doing my geography degree, and when I was surrounded by all these plants, and I was counting how many species were in a 1 meter square sector, and to the untrained eye, which mine had been to that point, it was just grass. And in fact, it's what George Monbiot would call a green desert in his book, Feral. I think his book was called Feral, when he's talking about the grass nibbled uplands. And but in one of these 1 meter squared sections, I had like 75 different species of grasses, of mosses, all these little flowering wild plants. And I was just like, this is incredible. And with each blade of grass I looked at to identify which kind of grass that was, that so much intricacy was kind of, it was drawing me in, the beauty and the diversity that I was finding. And it was really mosses that I really fell for, just because they are just so exquisite. And then it took me a few years really kind of falling into a world of plants by kind of working on voluntary projects around the world, doing organic farming, kind of what else did I do? Permaculture, all these different things. And it was all relating to plants. But it wasn't until the early 2000s when I started reading books about plant consciousness that I suddenly realized that was what I was working towards. So then I did a couple of trainings, and the second of which was an almost a year long apprenticeship with Stephen Harabuna. And I finished that the day that we finished. We had this big party, and then we went. I left and went to the airport, flew to LA where I was going to fly back to the UK from. And while I was there, no, it was San Francisco, but that's irrelevant. While I was there, I just checked my emails because it was in the days before having a mini computer in your hand all the time. So I just went to my laptop and plugged it in, checked my emails, and somebody, a publisher in the UK, had offered me a book deal to write about the medicine of plants. And I thought, this is the plants. They're doing it. They're making me do it. They're making me stand up and carry this on and giving me a way that I don't slip out of working with them every day. So and then ever since then, because of that opportunity, because I had that opportunity to write that book, I've been able to continue to write, continue to explore and investigate and teach it and all the rest of it that came with that.
Great. Thanks so much. You know, I know in your book here, you know, which is really a very enjoyable book to read and very interesting, you talk about rewilding. And what does rewilding the self mean to you, and why is it needed?
So rewilding, I mean, we talk a lot, actually, a lot more and more. It's becoming a more used word. And a lot of the time it's used about rewilding land. And of course, why is the land unwilded in the first place? And that's because of humans. So the reason why it's important, which I'll speak about first, because it seems that's how I've gone. The reason it's important is because if we don't rewild the self, we will just create islands of lovely little privately owned land that people have reintroduced species to, but it won't go further than that. The reason we unwilded it, unwilded it, that's not really a word, but you know what I'm trying to say. We took it away from its raw, vibrant, original state, is because we fell out of love with that part of the world. We fell out of love with that part of ourselves. So rewilding, personal rewilding, is attempting or drawing yourself back as much as possible to a more natural way of being, to understanding your place amongst right, I'm going to call them amongst our relations, amongst all beings, amongst a living, inspirited, ensouled, intelligent world, not just the kind of modern take on things, which has been going on for hundreds of years, which is humans as the intelligent ones, you know, humans being separate from everybody else. It's just re-immersing ourselves into this amazing, intricate sharing of life and of experience with all beings. So that's what rewilding is, personal rewilding is, from my perspective, and that's what I obviously talk about in the book and like to share with people.
Well, what do you mean when you say plant whispering? What does that term mean to you?
So plant whispering is essentially, it is well, hearing, listening, paying attention, and listening to what is coming in from the plants and speaking back. I mean, it's like you hear about the dog whisperer or whatever. It's exactly the same, but with plants. So it's learning ways. First of all, it's just paying attention to who captures your attention, which plants are capturing your attention, and then creating a space where you can start to listen and realize what, if there's anything coming in, if there's any changes in you. And then with a bit of practice, yeah, with intention, you can communicate back. So it's basically, plant whispering is two-way communication with plants. That's the short version, the potted version.
Okay. How would you say that rewilding and plant whispering are connected?
Okay, so basically, I don't think you can personally rewild without making space for the voices of the other beings, the other natural beings in your life. So, I mean, rewilding, there are many activities you can do that you might consider a rewilding activity. So you can walk barefoot, you can go foraging for food and medicines, you can run around naked in the rain, you can swim in the ocean, you can do all of these things, and they're all great, and they all will kind of feed your appetite for more wild immersion, more time spent outside and doing these wonderful wild things. But what happens when you open yourself up to the possibility that the more than human, that the other beings, the other wild and natural beings that live on this planet can communicate with you, it kind of adds a whole other dimension to it and takes everything so much deeper.
Why do you think it's particularly important to communicate specifically with plants?
Well, because they stand a little bit more still than than a lot of other beings. Um, but I also think they're reaching out to humans at this time. I also think, for me personally, I heard the plants. So for me, I think it was the obvious path to go down. Um, but yeah, I mean, if you look at an oak tree might stand for like 900 years, and it really doesn't move very far from that spot. So season after season after season, you can return to that same being, sit in their presence and learn from them. Whereas if you want to do insect communication, because insects are important just like plants, right? But good luck following that fly around your living room, even, to 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 stand there still enough to just say, what am I feeling when I'm in your presence, and what could that possibly mean? Whereas with plants, you can do that and you can slow it right down. And of course, also plants, I mean, we couldn't be alive without plants. Our breath comes from the exchange with, their oxygen production in return for our carbon dioxide production. So it's an exchange already happening. And you look around your room, my clothes are made from plants, not this chair, but my other furniture is made from plants. Open my fridge door, all my food is made from plants. And even if you enjoy eating a lot of meat, your meat is made from plants. So, you know, everything about our lives is a relationship with plants, essentially. So yeah, they're really important. But I mean, you can take it back and say, well, actually, they're not necessarily the most important thing. We're all important in this grid. Bacteria are important, and pollinator flies and all these things are important. So I think my specific attraction to plants is because, yeah, they called me in. They've appeared so many times in my life and saved me so many times and told me so many things, that for me, that's the important, or not in the important. There's not really anyone more important than the other, but that's my gateway into the rest of the natural living world.
When you say that the plants called you in, what does that mean? Is that something that would potentially happen to anyone, or was that something just more typical for your life?
It happens to everyone all the time, every day. Okay, so you're walking along the street, and actually right opposite my house there's a cemetery, and over the wall of the cemetery is a bright red rose. It's so beautiful, and it's so um I know that the council workers, they're not putting loads of manure on there, they're not pruning, they're not even deadheading. Just year after year, this beautiful plant with these absolute stunning display of bright red roses tumbles over the wall every year. That calls me in, and it calls me in by being so stunning and beautiful that I go over excuse me, and I have a little sniff, And I paused for a moment. And in that moment of pause, and this happened even before I'd even kind of thought about I could potentially ever communicate with a plant. In that moment of pause, something inside me goes, and something inside me goes, wow, and something inside me gives something back to the plant. So the plant gave me this moment of beauty, this beautiful fragrance, and I gave back this appreciation, this love even. And that's a calling from a plant. A plant calls you when you notice, oh, look at all those lovely raspberries on that bush over there. Don't they look tasty? Oh, I'm just going to go and nibble on one. You were called over by the plant, and the gift from the plant to you was this raspberry, and you give back your gratitude as you go, oh, wow, yum, yum, yum. So it's not something grandiose, even though maybe it sort of sounds like, oh, called by a plant, that sounds a bit woo woo or something, but it's not. It happens to all of us all day every day. Yeah.
Nice. So you feel that communicating with plants is something that all people can do that?
Absolutely, I do, because I think the skill set for doing it is actually very simple. It's not in any way grandiose, because it's, well, we all can think about how we were born. We were born actually as wild animals. I mean, we were born into a domestic scenario, but we were born, like, ask any, I haven't given birth, but a lot of my friends have. And, that is a wild animal moment as they're giving birth. And it kind of, that a lot of them have said to me, a lot of my friends have said to me, you become a different animal when you give birth because of this process you go through. So we are animals, we are wild animals. In those first few weeks, your eyesight isn't really there, you're not really focusing, and most certainly your spoken language skills are not there. So how are you working through the world? First of all, you're perceiving with feeling. You're perceiving, wow, I feel safe in these arms of whoever loves you. You can tell if you're with somebody that is not quite so sure, because then you start screaming and crying and you're taken back into the arms of your mother or your father or your closest family members. So you straight away, you're working with this kind of feeling sense. And then as you kind of get slightly further away from your mother, you crawl around the floor and you taste everything, you put everything in your mouth, you smell everything, you touch everything. So you have your senses, your feeling sense first of all, but then you have your physical senses. And all of these things are what you need in place to work, to communicate with a plant. And because we all have them, some of us don't have sight, some of us don't have hearing, we don't all have all of them, but we've all got some of them. And with those, you can explore the world of plants. And that's how simple communication can be. Like when you said, how does a plant call you? It's as simple as you going over and smelling and using your eyes and seeing, and then going over and smelling. And that is a communication, because you're giving something back in that moment. So I do believe 100% that everyone can do it. I do believe that there's a lot of people who probably think they can't do it, but it depends on how you frame it in the first place. And also, if you tell yourself you can't do something, then you can't do it until you believe you can. So that's also important.
Nice. So are there some general approaches or principles for getting started with communicating with plants that you would suggest?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think you just have to, it's really useful to have no expectations, because expectations will get in the way of what you feel like, of what you actually are receiving. Because yeah, just try to have no expectations and have an open heart. Just be open to whatever comes. And beyond that, it's just a gentle and a slow exploration. So the first and most easiest one is, and I've shared this so many times, but it's just such an easy way to realize that you can feel, you can use your feeling sense. So my little exercise that I offer to people is to go to a tree. So first of all, just try and center yourself and calm yourself, and then go to a tree. Maybe go to a birch tree. You might not have those in your neighborhood, but a tree. Go to a tree and just notice, just try and be as calm and clear before you go to that tree, and then just sit with that tree for 10 minutes, 20 minutes, and notice how you feel. You might not think you feel any different than before you went to that tree, but give it a go. And then come back out from under that tree and straight away go to a different kind of tree. So you started with birch, maybe next go to an oak tree and go and sit with an oak tree again for 20 minutes and just pay attention to how you're feeling. And you should notice a difference. And then you go to a third tree, and with that third tree, notice again, this time yet another type. So maybe this time a yew tree. Okay, so 3 different kinds of tree, distinct types of tree. And sit with that tree, and again, you will feel different. And I have done this with probably hundreds of people actually over the last sort of 15 or more years. And I have not yet had a single person. I've had people say, I can't feel anything, but do you feel different to you did underneath the last tree? Yes. Okay. And do you feel different again? Yes. Okay. So confidence is a big part of it, but just simply tuning into how you feel is a starting point for okay, there's a feeling that I get when I'm with this other being, and I can tune into that. And that's a starting point. It's not very complicated. You're not going to get many massive downloads from tuning into that, but it is definitely a starting point. And I mean, and moving on from that, just like the baby, moving on from that with our senses of touch and taste and smell. And that's when you can start to learn. Maybe they're just like physical things about the plant in that moment, but they add up. And yeah, I mean, sit together with a group of people and you'll all start having insights. You'll all start realizing certain things. If you go back around the group, 10 of you all together go and do this exercise, and then you sit and you drink a cup of tea made from the same leaf, and you will all begin to have different insights, but that are all connected. And then you start to realize this is actually coming from the plant. It's easier to do to begin with, comparing different plants if you're doing it on your own, because otherwise you'll think you're making it up. And especially for people who have a really kind of sort of a scientific mind that really needs to have a bit of proof, you can talk yourself out of it. You can say, well, this is just rubbish, I'm making this up. But the more, if you sit with other people or if you do comparison between different plants, you'll notice that there is a difference there. So those are the most basic skills, and they're the skills that we've all got without any need for equipment or anything. You just need 3 different plants, and ones that are edible, I guess, would be helpful if you're going to make a cup of tea with it.
Well, to what extent do you think that plants want to connect with humans and also to help humans? And why would they want to do that?
Okay, this is a great question. I am really sure plants want to connect with humans. And actually, I think certain plants have stepped forward in the last. I used to get a little bit upset about the kind of wave of interest in, for example, ayahuasca. Okay. So, I mean, I know that's usually 2 plants, it's certainly more than one, but like the vine and some other admixtures to make the chemical components of this psychedelic brew. But I used to be quite upset by this, but then it suddenly dropped in that actually plants have agency, and it really could be that ayahuasca is offering themselves to the world to help wake us up. Because I think so many people, the way I just described, oh, a rose called to me, I went over and smelt it, people would be like, I was just smelling a rose, right? Without kind of taking it further. But I actually believe that that plant or that group of plants have specifically said, look, I don't even mind if I end up being endangered where I traditionally come from. I'm going to travel the world and contact humans and invite them in, because we, obviously we're at this polycrisis for life on Earth. We've created so much, this kind of mess really that we find ourselves in, and it's not just humanity that we're in danger of losing a planet that we can actually live on. It's all the plants, it's all the beings, it's all the animals that are going extinct every single day. So it's in the plant's best interests to kind of say, hey guys, hey, there's something more to life, and it's what you've all been missing. It's why you all feel like you have to consume to fill this empty hole. It's us. And I really do feel like that. I feel like they're stepping out, and I feel like ayahuasca, even though at the kind of a few years ago I was just like, oh, this feels so uncomfortable for me, this mass consumption of this plant. But now I'm starting to see, actually it has woken a lot of people into a state where they've gone beyond that now, and they're seeking plants in their home country, not just entheogens, not just hallucinogenics or supposedly mind altering plants, because any plant can be mind altering, but it's waking people up to the absolute joy and depth and richness of the dandelion and the stinging nettle. People weren't that interested 20 years ago, 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, but I feel like it's raising in everybody's consciousness this interest in plants and plant consciousness, plant intelligence, plant communication. And so I feel like the plants have reached out, and I feel like with every healing, with every message, with every piece of wisdom they give us, they're trying to lead us into more wholeness. And it's like, isn't that a bit weird? They just keep giving us medicine for ourselves, but they're not, because in becoming more whole, each human, there's 8.5 billion of us, so each one of us has got trauma, has got issues that we didn't even know necessarily that we've got. But we've all got anxiety because we've been separated from our natural way of being. We're not surrounded by all the relatives that we would be if we were growing in a grass hut in the woods somewhere, so we've got all these kind of complex layers of issues going on. And as the plants offer healing for all of those things, or wisdom or help through that, each one of us becomes more whole in response to working with the plants. And as we do so, the earth, Gaia herself, becomes more whole. It kind of fixes a little part of it. If you see each broken one of us as a broken thing, the more of us that get fixed, the better it is for everyone. And the more fixed, the more rewilded you become, the more in line with our natural way of being you become, the better it is for the plants, because we start living in a more respectful way. We start treating the earth with more respect and more reverence. And so I feel like they want to get in touch with us to wake us up so that we live more respectfully, so that the future options for them are improved.
Great. Well, thank you. I'll throw out one more question, and then we'll be taking some questions in the chat. So please put your questions in the chat, as well as the ones that are already there. So you're basically saying that plants are able to help us to become more whole, and that's one way that they can help to address the problems in the world. Would you say that you're optimistic about the future because of the role of plants?
It depends. It depends. It depends. Optimistic about which future. um,
Any
yeah.
future.
Well, I feel like we have to go through. We're gonna have to go through, and we're on the precipice. We're beginning to go through it. The kind of breakdown of the way we're currently living, I think it really has to come. We cannot keep going the way we are. And so I feel like there is going to be some great turmoil and trauma in the near future. But I think the closer you are to the natural way of being, the more you're able to be open to other intelligences beyond human. I feel like it will be an easier transition. And I feel like the more people that do kind of remember this as our natural way of being, that we do communicate with all our relations, that we do pay attention and live in respect for them, then maybe we will kind of change the trajectory that we're on. I mean, there's just so many people that are sort of paying $1 million for some kind of designer watch. There's so many people for whom that is what they wish for in their life. So, I think it's a little bit of a uphill battle, but I think the more of us, the more people, the fact that you even exist, not you personally, Paul, but the plant initiative exists, the fact that there's some momentum behind it, and that, there's people out there, there's reports coming out all the time, there's a momentum building. So yeah, there is an element of hope that with enough people suddenly going, wow, plants are intelligent, even if you don't go as far as thinking I can communicate personally with them and receive a response to my inquiry. Even if you don't go that far, but you kind of go, okay, I understand that through the help of mycorrhiza, plants can communicate with each other. They are intelligent beings. They deserve our respect. So we're, the more people who bring out papers and write books and celebrate this, the more likely we are to get to a place where we can kind of swerve a little bit. Hopefully, we might not survive though, might we? Humans. I say that with a big smile on my face, because I think we just need to go through a huge overhaul, and a huge change to get to somewhere that is in a more harmonious place to live. But I think as and when we get there, it will be a much more beautiful place.
Yeah, a lot of what you talk about really resonates with indigenous worldviews and indigenous practices, and there's been a number of different comments in the chat about that. I was wondering if you might just talk a little bit about the connection with the worldview that you're talking about respect for plants and other beings and indigenous practices, and to what extent you've learned from or been involved with indigenous practices.
Sure, yeah. I mean, the more, obviously there's so many, well, I say so many, there are few remnants around the world of different indigenous practices that are still intact, of course. And of course, this is the original way of being. Of course, this isn't, I haven't invented this. This is their way of being. They've never fallen out of knowing what we are now having to relearn. I have spent time with indigenous people. I spent time with people in Kenya, and the interesting thing was they never told me their methods or gave me a ceremony that I could take away and copy and appropriate somewhere else. But what they did do was encourage me to find my own way. And I mean, I've got this one moment that's stayed in my heart, stayed with me always, because I was in Kenya and I was with the Baran tribe, these people, and we'd spent a few days together walking around. They were foraging medicine plants, showing me, oh yeah, we eat this for tummy ache, or we just like nibbling on this when we're out for a walk. This one we dig the root. We often don't often find it, and when we get the root, it's a great prize, and it's really good for headaches, or this kind of thing. And then we got back to the camp one night, and it was a three-way translation because I was speaking English, and so I had to speak English to someone who spoke Swahili. They would translate it to Swahili to someone who could then translate it to the tribal elder who I was sat with, the tribal medicine man I was sat with. And he hadn't given me this medicine man, he hadn't really looked at me directly the whole time. He'd been just talking and showing stuff, but we hadn't had this connection. And then one night he actually asked to the three-way translation, how do you connect with plants? Or how do you know what the plants are saying? And I told him that they tell me in dreams, because I didn't know how else to describe what I was receiving. And he reached over and he took both my hands in his hand, and he just looked directly in my eye, and this thing passed between us, and I knew he recognized me, and I knew he was just like, we didn't need the translation anymore. He was just like, yes, that's it, sister. So yeah, beautiful. And yeah, it is difficult because it's always been there. It's always been there in our human history until recently, until the industrialization of the world, until we fell away from our natural way of being. And that's what the whole rewilding thing is. I mean, yeah, you could probably find, if you could find an indigenous group that was welcoming and that would say, yes, come to be with me, come to learn our ways, then we could each go and you could learn it so much better and so much clearer and so much easier than what my muddling through kind of trying to find out for myself version. But there isn't many people like that left, and if all the rest of the 8 point whatever billion of us who live in this more dystopian version of reality, if we all wanted to go and learn directly, there isn't space and there isn't room. So I think the answer is we're all indigenous to Earth, and it's just tuning into Earth will remind you and teach you, help you unlearn all of this stuff that we've been taught since our earliest days. Don't pick up that stick, dear, you'll get ill. Don't touch that. Oh, it could be poisonous. Don't do this, don't do it. All of that stuff. Put your shoes on. All of those things. All of those things. If we just tune in, yes, it would be quicker if we could all go to an indigenous group, but we can't. There aren't enough people left. And yes, there are some amazing indigenous people out there who are stepping forward and sharing what they know. Robin Wall Kimmerer is one of my, I'm her number one fan. She's shared so much in her writing about connecting with plants, and how beautiful is that to share with the world. So yeah, so the more people that can share it, but yeah, not appropriating, I think that's also really important, isn't it? Just not just going to places and taking this knowledge from people, but actually tuning in where you live. Because that was one of my things with ayahuasca, is just like, oh my gosh, why is this wave sweeping across the planet, where people in Thailand, and where they've got the most psychedelic mushrooms on the planet, are now taking ayahuasca. But I think in a way we had to be opened up to suddenly realize we're standing on Earth too.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Here's a question from Amy, and she asks, Rachel, has your communication with plants changed the way you eat? Do you find it important to choose fruits instead of taking roots or leaves that damage and kill plants?
Thank you, Amy. Good question. I eat respectfully. Do I eat less roots? I don't eat that many roots, but I do eat roots. Has it changed how I eat? It's definitely changed how I eat, because what I found is the more wild foods I eat, the more wild foods I'm attracted to eat, more wild leaves, the darker, the greener. So yeah, maybe I eat more leaves actually than I ever used to. But I do grow food plants as well, and I grow them to be food. And in that, like yesterday, I was clearing out an area where some comfrey I had also planted has become really taking over the whole area, and I had to clear some away because my raspberries were too short and not getting any sunshine. And but as I was doing so, I was talking and I was digging up the roots of the comfrey, even though I know they'll come back because they always do. But as I was doing so, I was saying, I was talking and I was communicating, and I still have to eat. I still have to eat. If I ate meat, which I don't, but if I ate meat, you'd have to look at your little gathering of chickens and say, who will be my food? Is anyone willing to offer their life so that I can eat, so that I can take a life, so that I can eat? It's like that with your foods. It's like that with my food. I always leave some to go to seed. I was collecting parsnip seed also yesterday. I've eaten some of my roots, but I let some go to seed, so at least some get to complete their life cycle, and free seed all around. Yeah. So yeah, it has affected me, but it hasn't stopped me eating roots, I'm afraid.
Thank you. Here's a question from Lynn. She says, here in New Zealand, there are plants that are introduced pests which can take over the habitat of the native plants and destroy them. Some can only be controlled using toxic chemicals. Can this be done in a respectful way, do you think?
I think that's a really big question, because yeah, obviously no one really wants to be using toxic chemicals. I don't think they're great. And there was a book, and I wish I could remember what it was, but about how maybe sometimes the plants that have gone to a place have gone there because they're going to be needed there, because as the climate changes and things change, maybe the plant life also there needs to change. That's not going to be a happily received answer in somewhere like New Zealand, where you're an isolated island and you've got endemic plants that are going to getting kind of crowded out by these I don't know what you might call them, invader plants. I mean, the respectful way to do it is just to communicate as you're doing it. But I don't know. There has to be a way other than toxic chemicals, because that's going to kill all life, even the plants you're trying to save, by removing the plants that you don't want to have there. And actually, sometimes, I mean, this is like sometimes plants that are invasive. So here we get Japanese knotweed. Is it Japanese knotweed? I think it's Japanese knotweed, but that's actually it's become known as a herbal medicine for Lyme's disease. And as it's become more predominant, so has Lyme's disease, because the predator to deer have gone. So we've got too many deer, and then the deer carry the ticks. And so there's this kind of broken world that's trying to balance itself. And sometimes I think we think, oh, we must preserve it as it is. Whereas sometimes it might just be that the wild of the world is trying to rebalance itself. We don't always know best.
Thank you. Here's a question from Isis. Have all the responses you have received from plants been positive?
Well, I mean, mainly when I approach a plant with a clear intention and a clear question, I have mainly been given a clear response that is very much usually in the positive framework. But I do have to say, my husband went outside, because I work so, like, it's so enlivened where I live, because the plants are so used to being spoken to. Where there is a lot of places where the plants are almost in shock when you stop and kind of pay them attention, because they're just not used to having attention paid to them. So anyway, so my garden's quite a rowdy bunch, and my husband went out there with the strimmer one day, and he pulled the starter on the strimmer, and and the dandelions told him to F dot 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 off loudly. And he turned the strimmer off and literally ran indoors. And he goes, "You'll never believe what happened." And I said, "I'm actually, I can't believe it." So, and also, I mean, I have also been tricked by a plant before. When I was in Kenya, that I mentioned earlier, I'd been in Kenya and I'd out on my own doing this kind of solo work with plant, and I got invited to taste the flower, which I did. And it was immediately apparent that this was not for human consumption. My mouth, my throat started burning, and I was straight away like, "Oh my God, I've got to go back and try and find my guide so that he can help me with, some antidote. I might die here. What's going on?" And as I walked away, I could hear the plant laughing. I actually heard a chuckle, and it was like a trickster, a tricky plant, a tricksy plant. So I've never really had, I've been told, sometimes I've been told things that are challenging, that are difficult to take. But other than those two, or, various little kind of things like that, I've very, very, I don't think I've ever had a negative response from a plant. I've had a plant that's not that interested in speaking, that didn't have much to say, but yeah, once there is a communication going, I've never really had a negative response. No.
Thank you. Liz asks, roses are lovely, but what about the need to transition to native plants?
Yeah. Roses are lovely. I mean, roses here, there's a lot of roses that, like wild roses, there are kind of native versions. And yeah, I mean, I hear what you're saying. Kind of ornamental plants versus the natural foliage, the natural flora that would be here if we were not bringing the plants in. Yeah, I mean, I used rose because everybody knows and loves, most people love a rose. But yeah, lawn daisy will do it to you too. I mean, who hasn't, as a child, picked daisies on the lawn and made a daisy chain? And in that moment, you're having a communication with the daisy. You're like, "You are fun, you're great to be around, I love you very much." That's your communication back to the daisy. So that's the daisy calling the children in. So yeah, I mean, of course, our natural native plants will be calling, and yes, ornamental plants that we've brought in. But it's a bit like the question about the plants in New Zealand. I think sometimes you've got to remember, if plants have agency, if plants have consciousness, and plants have intelligence and the ability to choose, plants also have the ability to persuade us to do things. And sometimes they persuade us to take them with us to different places. Not always. Sometimes they're taken, perhaps, obviously, against their will, without being asked, without being respected. But like when you're in a garden centre, there might be lots of different plants, and some of them, you can buy yarrow. This is a plant that grows wildly everywhere. There'd be pots of yarrow. A yarrow might ask to come to your garden, but then just as well, a plant that isn't necessarily native can also call you and bring you in. I mean, I'm all over the native plants of this land, and that's kind of what I live in England, and that's the plants that I love to work with most of all, because I think they have the longest history here. And if I'm trying to get back into remembering what it is to be a real human, which is essentially what this whole rewilding thing is, then those ones that have been here the longest probably are the wisest. So yeah, that's my thoughts.
Here's another question, a little different vein, from Josephine. She asks, are houseplants the way to begin rewilding?
Oh, houseplants are such an interesting question, aren't they? I've got one right there. um, and that's not a native plant either. I guess, probably a jungle plant, considering the drip tip on the leaf there. Um, you see, houseplants are a bit like house pets, aren't they? They're beings that we have hugely domesticated, or, well, yeah, just by having them in a confined space in a house where they're not getting 360 degrees light or the shade of other trees or leaf litter falling at the leaves from other plants. They're not getting rain, they're getting water from, from the water supply. Um, they're an interesting place, but so so yeah, they're not wild either. They're domesticated just like us, but they really appreciate communication. Um, if you can imagine having a dog in your house that you ignore all the time, and then a dog in your house that you communicate with and you tell it how beautiful it is and how you love it and you give it cuddles and all the rest of it, you've got two different kind of dogs. It's the same with plants. If you've got a house with house plants and you communicate with them, they are going to be more vibrant, more alive. I've actually watched it happen. I had a group, and it got to winter, and we couldn't go outside because it's dark from 4 o'clock here in winter in the afternoon. So, like, having this evening group, and we'd been working all summer long with different plants, and it got to winter, and we didn't want to stop. We didn't want to stop our group, so we kind of came to the agreement that each week one of the people would bring in a house plant to work with. And I took in my spider plant and it looked okay to me when I got there. But after an hour of, it was only 3 or 4 people in the group, and after an hour of this focused attention and love on it, it was visibly different. It was visibly more vibrant, visibly more, I mean, yes. So I don't know how. It will definitely help you. It will definitely help your skills, and it will definitely cheer up your living space if you start communicating with your, house plants. But and if you have no option, if you're housebound, if you're ill, if you've got no way of getting outside, then absolutely. But if you can get outside, and if you can stand barefoot in your garden and notice the plants that are landing between your toes, then that would be probably a better way to go.
Thank you. Here's a question from Emmanuelle. She asks, with the urban agriculture and reforestation movements in many American cities like Detroit, Michigan, that are addressing food deserts, what's important to keep in mind in terms of ecosystem rematriation and remediations?
Well, I don't really know that program because we don't have it here. So I'm assuming it's kind of taking over vacant lots and bringing in plants to grow for food. Yeah.
Uh-huh. Or,
Yeah.
or right, or reforestation and
Or
planting urban
reforestation.
trees.
Yeah. So there's two questions in that really, because the reforestation one, they have to be native trees and they have to be grown in nearby, preferably from local seed, preferably in a local nursery before planting out. We've got loads of problems in trees in this country because of, even though of course we can grow trees here, people have been importing trees from Europe, and importing diseases with them. And I'm not talking about the big forestry commission plantations where it's all this kind of very out of place trees all in one big monoculture. I'm talking about even plants, trees like ash tree. We've brought in disease that is now creating a massive problem. So I think that's something really to consider. I mean, food plants as well. I mean, it's a wonderful thing. I think it's a wonderful thing to kind of bring food into these food deserts and allow people to have a connection with plants that will feed them. I think it's a great and wonderful thing. Um, it just has to be done carefully and with respect. I mean, in that kind of urban project, there won't be the time, there won't be the ability to sit with the land first and ask what the land would like. but that's what I would do if I had the money to buy myself a couple of acres that I decided I was then going to allow to or to encourage it to rewild. Before I kind of did anything there, I would sit with that land season after season and ask what it wanted, who it wanted there, what it would like for me to do, if anything. What would you like me to do? How can I help? But you can't do that in these small projects. And so I think with regards to the trees, make sure they're local and they're locally grown as well, so that the seeds of those trees are great for that particular environment. And I think the food crops, I think, yeah, well, just make sure you look after the soil, because that's how you look after us all, really.
Thank you. Here's a question, a different question from Mary. Do you also connect with the beings associated with plants, like the fairies and nature spirits?
Um, they come to me. They do come to me. I think once you open, I mean, I don't go seeking them, um, because there is so much richness already. But once you have opened your awareness to the multidimensionality of being, which is what the plants open you up to, you do notice other beings around. And so, yeah, they're there, and they come and say hello.
Great. Great. Well, we're about out of time here for our hour, and these have been some really great questions. Thank you so much for sharing this, and for being so personal in terms of telling us your story and helping us to understand more about the opportunities that are there in terms of connecting with plants. And thanks also to everyone for suggesting such interesting questions. Sorry that we weren't able to get to all of them. I think you should be able to save the chat, everyone, by going to the top of the chat area, and there's 3 dots. And I think you should be able to save them there. But if for whatever reason you can't save the chat, because there's been a lot of comments there. So feel free to just contact us at the Plant Initiative, and I can send you a copy of the chat if you can't copy it yourself. So with that, I'll turn it back to Walter for our closing remarks.
Great. I just want to thank Rachel and Paul very much for such an interesting and wide-ranging conversation. And thanks to all of you audience members for sharing your stimulating questions. This program has been one of a series of online events about the human-plant connection, and we are planning additional programs for 2024, and we hope that you'll join us for these as well. Thanks again for attending today. And if you would like to support these types of programs from the Plant Initiative, we are always appreciative of donations through our website, which is www.plantinitiative.org. Thanks everyone so much for being here today, and have a great rest of your day wherever you are.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you for having me along as well.
Thank you so much, Rachel. It was great.
Absolutely.
Thank you.